Okay. Bye, everybody. I'm back again. And uh, so we'll see. I think I may have to exit out and start YouTube again. It's always YouTube. Um, yeah. Sorry about being late. It's Monday, so that's kind of part of it. But I spent all weekend getting ready and trying to merge stories. And then I came to the conclusion that I'm just going to read one of the versions of the chapters. Because, for example, chapter 16, I have, I believe, hold on. One of these I accidentally stapled two chapters together. No, that would be chapter 19. I did that. Anyway, this one there is only 3 versions of this, but some of them have 4 versions of the same chapter. And there is a specific chapter or a specific version that is different from the rest. So there's that, which I'm not sure. I'm going to have to probably compile it better. But yeah, and I'm still, even with all that, because it looks like this version, which is not the one I'm reading, but this version I'm showing you here, it all shows up like it's taking parts of the next chapter and putting it into the current chapter it's in. So if I read chapter 16, the other versions have it as chapter 17. But not all of them. It starts around chapter 9. Surprise, surprise. Chapter 9, chapter 10. Like missing chapter 10, right around there. Boom. That's where everything changes. And I'm not sure what happened. But I do know that I'm very angry at my dad right now about this. Well, more really, really frustrated and annoyed. Because that's like the chapter. So I'll be working on that because I did get a chance to like do a finished reading, and I definitely it's ready to go ish. Like it's not right. Like it's very close to ready. I just have to pick a chapter and basically merge things together. Anyway, but I'm already late and I'm rambling, and I haven't introduced myself. For those of you who are just tuning in, my name is Beth Wagner, and I am currently reading my dad's manuscripts, as you could tell from like the little mini rant. Yeah, and I'm also doing, well, usually I'm doing live edits. This week is not happening so much, but I'm reading 2 chapters each night. And then on Wednesday, it's going to be reading chapters and doing a wrap up. And then I'm going to be taking some time off for a little bit. It'll probably be for a little while because I also have to get everything. I have to get the next story ready as well. But I have now 2 stories that I have to edit. I have to finish editing a science fiction story that I was editing. I have to finish editing that and publish that, and then I want to get this one ready to go. And it's really, really close to ready, so I feel like I can do this. So, enough of that. Let's get started with chapter 16. For those of you who are just tuning in and this is your first night, I am on chapter 16 of 20-ish chapters. So let me tell you, please go back to past broadcasts and watch those through first so you understand where I'm at in the story. It is linear and it's already bad enough because we're already missing a chapter. You don't need to go and miss all these other chapters as well. So without further ado, chapter 16 of Trollhunters. By pressing their horses, the Trollhunters managed to get within sight of Gatra's feet just as he led his party into the camp. They won't do anything this evening, Varian said. It's too late to be organizing storming parties, let alone setting up the kind of apparatus a really powerful spell needs. I think it's time for a little reconnaissance. What sorts of things would you like me to look for? Callisto said. Varian shook his head. Not that I doubt your abilities, but I think I have a better notion. Artran, do you think you can play the part of a young recruit? Artan's head jerked up. He was remembering again his part in what had happened. What? Of course. Varian looked at him sharply. I need you to pay closer attention, boy. Go down there in that sort of dreamy mood and you'll get yourself killed. Maybe the rest of us as well. Callisto held up a hand. Let me talk to him a moment or two, Varian. Come here, young Artran. She led him a little ways away from the rest. She turned to him. Look, youngster, everyone's done something stupid from time to time. A lot of people even done dangerously stupid things from time to time. What counts is what you do afterwards. If you allow that one stupid thing to rule the rest of your life, you'll probably never do much of anything again. You'll certainly be a little used to a band of troll hunters. Right now, you have a chance to do something that'll help us deal with the problem we're in. If you go out moaning and groaning to yourself about being the cause of it all, you'll be less than no good at all. You understand me? He looked up at her. Her face was stern, but there was an understanding in her eyes. He wondered what she might have done in her younger days. He nodded. All right, I'll do it. She put a calloused hand on his shoulder. Good lad. They rejoiced. They rejoined the others. Varian looked at him. You're ready now? Yes. You want me to play the new recruit? I think I can manage that after all. I was one not long. After all, sorry. Oh my goodness. I think I can manage that. After all, I was one not so long ago. There were a couple smiles at the weak jest. I'll be helping you along a little. You have a couple of spells on you. A spell to make people well disposed to you, and a spell to make people forget about you once they've talked to you. Isn't that a bit dangerous? Carnutran frowned. He'll be down there asking questions in wizard country. If they find someone with spells all over him, won't they be suspicious? Varian smiled. You do the sword fighting and the bloody part, Carnutran, and leave the magic to me. These will be the kinds of light spells that someone might pick up from any hedge wizard. Anybody who notices them won't think they're at all unusual. On the other hand, Artran, you're going to have to pick the people you talk to carefully. You want to talk to somebody near the wizard's camp, not one of the wizards themselves. They're a suspicious lot and would look closely at anyone asking questions. Look for general camp servants. Come up with a rumor of your own, something fantastic, like a notion of 3,000 of Fehimor's crack troops are going to be given wings to fly over the walls and open the gates. And being nearly fresh off the farm, you believe this. Someone is sure to start laughing at you and tell you a little more than they ought. And be careful that you don't seem too curious. If you stand around asking questions of everyone in sight, you might be taken for a spy and arrested. Artran nodded. a little impatiently. Yes, I know. Do more talking than walk. Do more listening than talking. And don't make myself conspicuous. I'm ready. The old wizard put his hands on Artran's shoulders and looked him in the face. Even if you hear that she's to be sacrificed at the time when the moon is straight overhead tonight, don't try to do something foolish like going in by yourself to rescue her. By now, you know just enough to make yourself think you can handle anything. But the kinds of magicians you find in the employ of kings could turn you upside down and pull you inside out without raising a sweat. Just find out what's going on and come back. If you try something heroic and get caught, you'll just make it difficult, if not impossible, for the rest of us to do anything at all. He went down to the camp, under a spell of invisibility, which would last until he got quite close. He arranged to come out from behind a bush near one of the springs at the edge of the wizard's camp, and anyone who saw him would just assume that he'd been in the bush for the usual reasons. He remembered Varian's last instructions. Don't be too self-confident, but occasionally try to act more confident than you are. Young, untried recruits hate being taken for young, untried recruits. He picked a man who was going from the wizard's encampment to the local spring for water. Ambling up, he met the fellow as he was lugging his jar back to the encampment. A little bit scary looking for those wizards. The servant was a heavy-set type in a brown tunic and kilt. He had brown hair, a square face, and a mole up by one of his gray eyes. He took in Artran at a glance and smiled. Not if you minds yourself. Got to hear things right the first time and not dawdle a lot. Young Jutran now, he were not a bad servant, but had a tendency to use a bit of the lip. Master finally wearied of it and turned him into a toad. This toad, he came hopping after us for days and days, hoping his master would relent. Finally, one day, he were stepped on by a horse. Interesting thing seems that broke the spell. So all of a sudden, there were this naked man squashed flat lying on the road. Gruesome sight that were. He shook his head. Playing his part as a new recruit, Artran looked suitably impressed. I hear that the magicians are going to give wings to 1,000 of the king's best troops so they can fly over the walls and open the gates for us. This gave the water carrier an opportunity to show that he knew more than most. He laughed. Wings, is it? That what they're saying around the campfires? Don't want to believe everything, boy. They aren't using wings, but Ganonish has some sort of cart thing he's going to roll down and smash through the walls. Ganonish? He's one of the head wizards then? Well, sort of. It was Gatras Fee, but he went off on some kind of trip, and Ganonish took the chance to get in with the king himself. Now Gatras Fee's come back, and he's mad as hornets about it. Now I gotta get this water back up there if I don't want to get turned into a toad. Without being too obvious, Artran managed to talk to 3 other people, 2 of whom gave essentially the same view. Ganonish was going to do something with his apparatus on the cart in order to knock down the walls of Finich and allow the king's soldiers to carry out their assault. The third decided to string the recruit along with a tale of a reign of toads on the city, which would eventually force the citizens to open up their gates to the king. There's a general rumor that Gatras Fee, once high in the king's favor, had to go off on some quest or other, leaving the way open for Ganonish to move in. Artran reported back to Farian and the rest of the group. We still have a while, he said. Ganonish is going to make his try tomorrow. And if it works, that's that. If it fails, then Gatras Fee will try his spell. So we should probably try to be ready to move tomorrow morning. No one said much about the newest of the band suggesting plans. Varian considered Artran's information. One thing is fairly certain. Gattersby will be doing whatever he can to ruin things for Ganonish. He won't dare do so openly, but I'd guess he'd be spending most of his night in his tent. I think I'd better spend a while thinking up spells to use and how to use them if we have to go up against Gattersby. Or if we have to go up against Gattersby when he's awake and watching. We're going to need every edge we can find. Surely Ganonish will have somebody watching out for any spells Gattersby might cast, Archon asked. And Varian shrugged. Gattersby knows that. All it means is that he'll have to be more subtle about it. The next morning, covered by a spell of invisibility, they were moving toward the wizard's encampment, keeping a cautious eye on what was happening outside the city. Artran was taking a careful step when the great Stashto was fired. He saw smoke as the thing burst, and suddenly he was waking up back in their own camp. He pulled himself up and looked around. Carnutron was sitting next to him, watching. What happened? The old warrior smiled slightly. I was hoping you might be able to tell us. We're No, Artemis. Yes. Why? Sorry. Uh-huh. She's helping me tell the story. We were moving in on the wizard's encampment when they set that thing up. They set off that great bang. A moment later, you and Farian were both unconscious on the ground, and the spell of invisibility was broken. Do you remember? I only remember seeing the big machine being set off, and nothing else. Carnutran frowned. With our two wizards out of action, we decided to fall back to the camp to make newer plans. You were trying to come around when we got back, but Farian is still unconscious. Artran shook his head to clear it, trying to remember things he'd been told. Farian talked about this sort of thing, about the effects of spells suddenly broken. Any magician in the area usually feels something. Some feel it more, some less. The one who is casting the spell is usually killed. Nobody seems to know who will be affected and in what way, though junior magicians generally suffer worst. He paused. Has there been any movement around the magician's encampment? Carnutran grinned without much humor. Lots of movement, nothing to worry about. Servants are busy getting magicians back to quarters, apparently for treatment. And if junior magicians are generally suffer worst, why are you awake when Farian is still out? Artran forced himself to grin in return. If I knew the answer to that, I could write a small scroll about it and become famous in magical circles. That's the trouble with magic. You do this and that, and the result is this. But there may also be peripheral results, and no one is at all sure what those might be. Carnutran is nodding, his impatience barely hidden. Just in case we have to go in a hurry, how much are you up to? Can you do any sort of magic at all? Artran's head looked up. Do you have my wand? Ah, yes, good. Let's see. He spent a few moments testing himself under Carnutran's watchful gaze. He wished Varian would have been able to teach him more about how to test his abilities without actually casting a spell. All right, he said finally. I can do some things. Not as much as usual, but if I stretch myself a bit, I can be of some help. I think the best thing I could do if we have to go in would be to hide us as well as possible. shielding my magical ability in particular. You can cast spell of invisibility? He shrugged. I've never tried, but I know how it's done, and I've helped Varian from time to time, such as back at the village where Derijua gave them the vision. I can do it, but I don't know how long or how strong it'll be. Carnatran nodded. Well, we'll have to make do with that. You won't take it as an insult if I hope Varian recovers before we have to move? Artran laughed. You won't take it as cowardice if I hope the same thing? Artran got himself to his feet, a little shakily, and looked around. The statue stood quietly at the edge of the camp, facing towards the ridge which hid Vinich and the investing army. How long has the statue been here? Carnatran shrugged. It came in a little after we pulled back to the camp. I just hope it won't do something to foul everything up for us. Varian roused a little before evening, ate a bite of bread, then drifted back to sleep. Preston decided not to attempt to attack at night, when most of the wizards would be in their encampment. It was also hoped that Varian might recover a bit more over the night. They were all awake just before dawn, even Varian, though he confessed to being a little bit groggy. They lay flat behind a bush and surveyed the camp, making brief plans. They could see the wooden altar that had been built just a little over the wreckage from the Sashto. At sunup, Derijua marched out of the tent, upright and proud as a queen in some ancient story going to her death. Artran felt suddenly cold, recognizing the same view as he'd seen in the scrying bowl. Then everything went crazy. The statue ran past them, faster than a man could run, headed on a course to intercept Derijua. The rest of them leaped to their feet, and Varian said, Artran, help me with the invisibility spell. Let's get down there. Artran forced calmness on himself as he worked the spell in conjunction with Varian. With this kind of spell, it was too easy to make a mistake, though he longed to be out of there this moment. He knew that the best chance for them all was the spell of invisibility. There were several hundred things that could go wrong with this spell. Most of them meant merely that the spell had failed, but there were a few that had serious consequences. An attraction of predatory animals to the area, for instance, a plague of sneezing that might go on for days. One of the worst was that the object or objects of the spell might simply disappear, never to be seen again. And it was necessary that the spell be continually renewed. Each time one of them struck a blow, they would become visible. And if they could suddenly become invisible again, it would be an advantage. By the time the spell was woven, they could already hear shouts from over the hill, shouts which went from alarm at the first sight of the statue to terror as it attacked. Then they went over the hill themselves. Down below, the statue had gone through the sparse line of soldiers guarding the magicians and the altar, gone through them like a rock through wet parchment. By the time they had covered a quarter of the distance, there was a clump of dark-clad magicians around this darker statue, trying to fight it. By the time they had covered half the distance, the bulk of the magicians were scattered, and a small squadron of soldiers were advancing on the statue, weapons ready. The morning's spellworking was not like the firing of the great Sashto. The king remained in his tent far removed from the altar and the sinister work to be done there. A small body of soldiers had been assigned to guard duty, with another squad on hand for emergencies. This was the squad which was now engaged with the statue. The statue's intention, even animated rock carving could be said to have intentions, was to rescue Darujua, and it ignored everything else, concentrating on overcoming those directly threatening her. Then suddenly, there was a figure in a green gown with a sword in hand fighting just behind the statue. Darujua had claimed a sword from one of the fallen soldiers. And was fighting on her own behalf. Then the troll hunters struck into the rear of the squad of soldiers. They were still invisible, and as well as the havoc they wrought, they also had an effect on the morale. The soldiers, turning to fight against whatever was coming up behind them, had only brief glimpses of warriors as they felt the wounds, saw the arrows strike, saw men felled by fireballs. Some of them decided that their own magicians were causing the disaster and started striking at them indiscriminately. The magicians, in self defense, began to fight back, causing even more chaos. In the midst of things, Artran felt the spell of invisibility slipping and poured more power into it. His partially trained senses told him that Farion was wearying and could no longer hold such a load. Then the spell went down altogether, and he saw Farion collapsing to the ground. They were about 2 spear lengths from Dirigua, separated by 2 ragged ranks of soldiers. Artran called to Dirigua, then threw 2 darts of light, putting down 2 soldiers. She saw this and moved through the gap, parrying one sword stroke and evading another. Artran stepped back. Carnatran, Beckel, shield me while I renew the spell. In the midst of the shouting, hammering, clamoring din, he concentrated on his wand and tried to remove everything from his mind, save the words of the spell. For a few moments, he was sure he was going to fail. Then things began to come together. There was this clicking in his mind of pieces of a wooden puzzle falling into place. Then the spell fell back over them, and the people who had been trying to kill them stood gaping. Pull back, Artran shouted. Let's get ourselves out of here. Carnatran swung Varian up over his shoulder like a sack of grain, and they moved out of the fight. It was not so easy as that, of course. At first, the soldiers would strike wherever they'd last seen one in the group. Then they would strike as if they thought they heard something. At last, the troll hunters were out of the mass of conflict, still centered around the statue, and were withdrawing quickly up the hillside. Then they sheltered by the hill, and Artran dropped the spell. For a moment he shivered, as though he too might drop, but he pulled himself up straight. He hoped someone else was capable of giving orders, for he knew he was good for little more than staggering along blindly. We have to get out of here, said Callisto. Once they get themselves a little organized, they'll have scouts all over. Dirishua, you share a horse with Beckel. The 2 of you are light enough, and his horse is strong enough. Let's go. Their habit had always been picking everything up first thing in the morning, so that they could just throw things on the horses and be gone. That habit proved its worth this day, as they were well on their way, while the sounds of battle still came from over the hill. So that was chapter 16. And now, chapter 17. And now I just have to figure out which one is the right chapter 17. Uh-oh. Okay, I think I'm reading the right chapter. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The spell required great magical concentration leading up to the actual sacrifice. As a result, Gatras Fee was in a near trance when the statue came. He was first aware of the statue as a magical disturbance in the neighborhood. Bringing himself a little out of his magical reverie, he looked up. He cast a quick search spell and recoiled. Some fools cobbled together an animation spell and messed the thing up. I'll have to get some people. He stopped. The gods of lost luck take Ganesh in his spell. The spell powering the Sashto had been so powerful that the backlash had incapacitated many magicians, even up in the higher ranks, who ought to have had sense to shield themselves against such things. This meant that Gatras Fee, in order to carry out his spell this morning, had to make bargains with people whom he would have preferred to stay far away from. It also left practically nobody capable of dealing with this thing coming at them. At least nobody he would be able to recruit without some time and effort, which would force him to put off the sacrifice for another day. And if the king were amenable, even if the king were amenable to that, there were already some dropping hints in royal ears that Gatras Fee had been behind the fiasco of the giant Sashto, and Thehamore was notoriously unwilling to accept excuses. He would be too likely to view today's debacle as simply another delaying tactic. Gatras Fee clenched his teeth. This was the end of it then. First thing to do was to get out with a whole skin and a head start. He dropped a quick spell over himself. Not quite invisibility, just something that steered the people's eyes away from him. Next, he would go to his tent, pick up what gold he had on hand. After that, he had to find a horse and be gone. In the longer term, he could certainly find himself a position in the court of one of the other two kings. What sort of welcome would the king of all kings in Tenaria give to somebody who had already been helping Thehamore try to take Finnish away from him? There was a ripple of magic coming down the hill in the wake of the statue. That would be the girls' companions, of course. He had to have dealt with them when he had the chance, killed a lot of them. Well, perhaps he could settle accounts with them before he went off to look for employment. The Trollhunters rode away from the field. If we're lucky, Carnatran said, nobody will even want to chase us for a while. First, we'll have to figure out what happened. Fine, Pothar grinned, clamping a big bloody rag over his left shoulder. Maybe we will sitting down and having a party, B? I was suggesting, B, that we moving as far as possible before they making up their minds, B. Best let young Artran have a look at that shoulder before we go much further. We don't want you falling off your horse. Ha! Riding was once time from young Dirijua's Garup country to Mothokowen with a worse hold in me than this. Carnatran grinned back at him. A true man of iron you are, Pothor. But why suffer when you don't need to? Artran, see what you can do for him. Artran, shaking off his own grogginess, did what he could, finishing off by saying, "Thus you should drink plenty of water and weak wine for a while to replace the lost blood." He realized how much he had been automatically following Varian's lessons when Pothor tossed his head back and laughed. You talking exactly like him, Ar. All you needing is the beard. Artran forced a smile. Good advice is good advice, whoever it comes from. Now, I suggest we get on the way. They discussed their situation that evening around the campfire. I'm not sure how much King Thehamore knows or will be told about today's events, Varian said. But I think we would be best to stay out of Gizraj for a good long time. Carnatran shrugged. I haven't left anything of importance in Gizraj. Nor have I, agreed Dervishua. But I would like to do some shopping before we get too far into the uplands. She was seated with her legs curled up beside her. Green gown was not suitable for the usual cross-legged position at the campfire. Carnatran glanced over at her and smiled. Yes, we have to do that. We'll have to do that. I think I can afford to lend you money to get more properly outfitted. Varian lifted a hand in objection. No, she's part of our group. Now we all pitch in to lend the money. Carnatran frowned. But we're barely a part of the group. It's not fair. And we're attacking Fairmore were, broke in Hothor. We bleeding for her were. We should begrudging be a few silvers to buying at least a sheath for that sword be? Carnatran was about to speak when Becklefoot spoke first. The big man's right. We'll all do it and do it right. Kellis Doe grinned. One of the first things we have to do is get her out of that green gown and into something decent. Poor young Artran is having a dreadful time looking everywhere but at her legs. Naruto scowled at that, and Artran was surprised to find himself bold enough to say, until she gets a sheath to put that sword into, I don't have the nerve enough to even admit she's got legs. That got a laugh, though Dirijua's scowl deepened. Next morning, Callisto went out scouting their back trail and returned with word that they had apparently were not being followed. For whatever reason, King Fenimore seems to have decided that we're not even worth the bother of pursuing. Varian nodded. After a night's rest, he was looking much more like his old self. I think, just to be on the safe side, we ought to stay in the uplands for some time, well out of his kingdom. Gatrassi made plans as he went. Yes, he would take time for revenge. But he wouldn't just kill them. He'd take the apprentice and enslave him, use whatever power the boy possessed to augment his own. He needed people to help him out. The same sort of people who helped him capture Dirishua in the first place. Gathering more men to help him was not going to be as easy as the last time. As a city under siege, Finich was no longer open to him, which meant he would have to depend on outlying towns for his recruiting. Well, if that was the way it was to be done, that was the way he would do it. And sometime in the next few days, the motor would have people looking for him. How long did he have before he had to watch his own back trail? His recent hunt for the girl had gained him some slight familiarity with his country. He knew, for instance, where a few of the major towns were located. Since he was going to be looking for people willing to do dangerous and illegal work, there was little point in going to the villages. He is not about to wander around picking up a man here and there while the quarry got further and further away. King Femorter surveyed the wreckage of his plans. Magic had failed him, and worse news was coming to him now. Majesty, the black-robed magician was saying, I can offer proof to you that Gatra's fee caused the destruction of the Sashto. The Mortar nodded. He suspected as much, but had hoped that the scoundrel would have been able to produce a success sufficient to warrant the royal eye overlooking the internecine plottings and trickery. I don't even know if that's a word. Internecine? He looked at the man who was obviously expecting a reply. He felt his jaw tighten. Very good. And for that piece of information, you're expecting rewards and promotions? Get out of my sight, Tugs and Reyes, and all the green grass of the fields. I am near to ordering the mass slaughter of anyone and everyone who makes any claims or pretensions to being a magician. Yes, get yourself out of my presence, and inform the rest of your ilk that your king is most displeased with magic and magicians. The magician bowed himself out as quickly as possible, or as quickly as he could do so, and still maintain protocol. Van Mortor sat looking at the entrance of the entrance of the tent, then shouted for aid. When the man appeared, he snorted, "That took you long enough. I could have had my own messages. I could have passed my own messages in the time you wasted. Now go summon the military commanders and have them meet me here as soon as possible." "Well, don't just stand there gawping, fellow, go." He got only slight pleasure from watching the man flee. By the time his marshals and captains and colonels had gathered, even that little pleasure was gone. He looked around at them. "Well, then, shall we storm the town?" There was no answer save a muttering from the rear. "At Duggan Races and all the red radishes," he broke out. "Has no one here the nerve to say, 'Lord King, we have too few siege engines, having depended too heavily on the magicians, and assaulting the walls would be a disaster'? Has none of you the nerve to speak up?" At last one of the older colonels stepped forward. "Lord King, I will not speak of the causes of it, but for whatever reason, we have little in the way of siege engines. An assault at this moment would end in slaughter, and every moment we spend outside these city walls making preparation is more time for the King of Tenaria to come down and take us without shelter." Van Mortor fixed the man with a glare. "So we are to turn and run? And by midsummer there will be revolts and risings among the Gardips, for they will have seen the king go out to war only to come tamely back without having fought a battle." The old colonel spread his hands. "Or perhaps we come home with a smashed army in no shape to deal with those revolts and risings. The decision is for the king to make." "Ha! As though the stupidest of you had not seen that decision must be. Very well, go out and make preparations. We will march tomorrow or the day after. And I would speak further with the commander of my Sashto troops." The commanders filed out of the tent, and finally the king was left alone, or as much as the king could be left alone, with a few guards, some servants, and the commander of the Sashto troops. Fenmore fixed his eyes on the man. "I want Gatra's fee. I prefer to have him alive, being a magician. But him being a magician, I will settle for having him dead. Send off a small force to deal with this. They'll probably have to travel through at least one of the other kingdoms, so they'd best be prepared to go in disguise. And I'd suggest you find men who are capable of riding horses and have them get horses from army stables." "Yes, Lord, if I may." "You want to suggest to me that Gatra's fee is an accomplished magician, and sending mere warriors after him might not be the most sensible choice? There was a magician in here a short time ago seeking my favor. Find him and tell him he'll have great favor if he accompanies you. If he has any intelligence at all, he will know what he has if he doesn't." "Yes, Lord." the commander strode out. Okay, so that was 2 chapters tonight. I'm not sure that I read the right version of it, but I do know that I will be merging them and trying to make trying to add in more details from all the different versions of the chapters, because some of the, like, one or two of the versions have different, like, have slightly different, like, some of them are just copies of each other, and then there's a couple that are fairly different. So I'm just going to be teasing out all the information to give you the most information in the story without being too long and involved. But just because there's enough missing from some of them that it could have more information related to the reader. So I'll be working on that. But yeah, so that's all for tonight. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Um, yeah, and I'll be back tomorrow night with 2 more chapters. And I'm going to try and be a little more on time. We'll work on it. It's a work in progress. But until then, I will talk to you all again tomorrow. Thank you.